Welcome to episode 184 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It is May 3rd, 1949, and today's story begins with a strike ending. Not in Colombia, at least not yet. In Uruguay, the professional footballer strike that had lasted more than 200 days is lifted. Across the River Plate, in Argentina, another player strike is also reaching its breaking point. For months, some of the best footballers in South America have been fighting for better wages, basic security, union recognition, and a degree of freedom from clubs that still treated them almost like property. So on the surface, this looks like the end of a labor crisis. But football history often turns at the point where a settlement solves one problem and opens another. Because while Argentina and Uruguay were trying to put their leagues back together, Colombian football was watching. And Colombian football had money. It had ambition. It had political chaos around it. It had a new professional league that was already fighting with its own federation. And soon, it would have Adolfo Pedernera, Nestor Rossi, Alfredo Di Stéfano, one of the strangest, richest, most rebellious leagues football has ever seen. This is the origin of El Dorado. To understand how we got here, we have to begin in Bogotá in April 1948. Jorge Eliezer Gaitán, the great liberal leader in Colombia, was assassinated, and the city exploded in what became known as the Bogotazo. Then the country slid into the violence that would define a whole era, La Violencia. In that atmosphere, football became more than sport. It became distraction, outlet, spectacle, and for the government, a useful national project. Colombia already had football, of course, but before this, it was fragmented. Regional competitions, amateur traditions, some semi-professional structures, and a long-running suspicion in some quarters that professionalism was somehow dirty. Then came the push for a national professional league, and two names matter especially. Alfonso Señor, the president of Millonarios in Bogotá, and Humberto Salcedo, connected to América de Cali and to the professionalizing impulse behind the new league structure. Together, through Dimayor, the División Mayor de Fútbol Colombiano, they helped turn the idea of a national professional championship into reality. In 1948, Colombia's first professional league season was played, and Santa Fe became the first champion. But El Dorado was not born simply because Colombia turned professional. It was born because Colombian professionalism collided with South American player unrest, political violence, and weak football governance. The key rupture came in 1949. Colombia's football federation, Adefútbol, and Dimayor fell out over the South American Championship in Brazil. The dispute involved money, control, and the question of who really governed Colombian football. Dimayor did not accept the federation's demands. Adefútbol disaffiliated Dimayor. What was meant as punishment became liberation. Because once Dimayor was outside the normal FIFA chain, Colombian clubs began to realize something extraordinary. They no longer had to play by the same transfer rules. They didn't have to ask the old club for permission. They didn't have to respect the retain and transfer logic that tied players to institutions. So if a player was on strike in Argentina, unhappy in Uruguay, underpaid in England, or trapped in a system that restricted his movement, Colombia could offer him something almost revolutionary: cash, and freedom, and a new stage. And that is where May 3rd, 1949 matters. In Uruguay, the players' strike ended that day. It had begun in October 1948 and was led by men like Obdulio Varela, the same Obdulio who 1 year later would become the soul of Uruguay's Maracanazo victory. The players wanted better economic conditions, protection as workers and athletes, and independence from club power. In Argentina, the strike had begun in late 1948 and dragged into May 1949. Futbolistas Argentinos Agremiados wanted recognition, better wages, and freedom from a system that could hold a player's registration almost indefinitely. The authorities eventually moved toward recognition, but the settlement still left many players dissatisfied. A salary ceiling remained, a deeper sense of control remained, and by then, Colombia had already seen the opening. The first great symbol was Adolfo Pedernera, not Di Stéfano, but Pedernera. That matters. Pedernera was not just a famous forward. He was the brain of River Plate's La Máquina, one of the great football teams of the 1940s. Muñoz, Moreno, Pedernera, La Bruna, Lusto. To bring Pedernera to Colombia was not like importing a decorative veteran. It was like importing a whole football civilization. Millonarios had the perfect channel. Their player coach, Carlos Cacho Aldape, was Argentine and knew Pedernera. The story has all the texture of an outlaw football market. Aldape sent south, money ready, old friendships activated, and a star who understood that the strike had frozen his football life. So Pedernera signed, and he arrived in Bogotá in June 1949. Thousands came to see him in the airport, and even before he played, he changed the economics of the thing. The crowd, the gate receipts, the newspaper attention, all of it told Alfonso Señor that the gamble had worked. Pedernera debuted for Millonarios against Deportes Caldas and immediately looked different. The press called him a phenomenon, an artist, the master of the pass, and soon the conclusion became obvious. If Millonarios had Pedernera, they should not stop there. So he went back to Argentina and returned with Nestor Rossi and Alfredo Di Stéfano, and that is the dam breaking. By August 1949, Millonarios were no longer merely a Colombian club trying to win a Colombian league. They were becoming a transnational football project. River Plate's intelligence had been transplanted to Bogotá. The young Di Stéfano, who might otherwise have become the defining post-war star of River in Argentina, was now on a different route entirely. The 1949 Colombian Championship became the proof of concept. Millonarios and Deportivo Cali fought for the title. Cali had its own foreign core, especially Peruvian stars in what became known as the Rodillo Negro. But Millonarios had Pedernera, Rossi and Di Stéfano, and a team now playing with astonishing attacking force. The phrase that sticks from the period is cinco y baile, 5 and dance. Score 5, then entertain. It sounds almost arrogant, but it also captures the spectacle of the league. Colombian football was no longer only competition, it was theater. Millonarios finished level with Deportivo Cali and won the championship in a playoff series, their first title, their first star, and the beginning of the legend. The name Millonarios suddenly felt less like a club name than a business model. The years that followed turned the gold rush into a football mythology. Other clubs joined in. Argentinians came, Uruguayans came, Peruvians came, then Brazilians came, Paraguayans came, and later even British players came, Neil Franklin from Stoke and Charlie Mitten from Manchester United, others tempted by salaries that dwarfed what the old maximum wage system in England allowed. For a brief period, Colombian football became perhaps the most cosmopolitan league in the world. And Millonarios became the great team of the era, the Ballet Azul, Pedernera as the teacher, Rossi as the command structure, and Di Stéfano as the force of nature. They won again in 1951, 52, and 53. And in 52, as we talked about in episode 150, they went to Madrid for Real Madrid's Golden Jubilee tournament and defeated the hosts 4-2. Di Stéfano scored twice. Santiago Bernabeu saw him. Real Madrid wanted him. And one of the most consequential transfer sagas in football history began. That is one of El Dorado's great long shadows. Without Colombia, Di Stéfano's path to Real Madrid is much harder to imagine. Without Colombia, the first great Real Madrid European dynasty may still happen, but not in the same way, and not with the same myth. So what did El Dorado mean? It showed that football's labor market could escape its cage. For decades, clubs and federations assumed that they controlled the movement of players. Colombia exposed the weakness in that assumption. If a league had money and didn't care about FIFA recognition, it could raid talent. That was intoxicating for players and terrifying for administrators. And it forced football's governing bodies to respond. FIFA and the South American authorities treated the Colombian situation as a pirate league problem. The issue was not merely that famous clubs had lost famous players. The issue was that the transfer system itself had been challenged. If Colombia got away with it forever, why would any ambitious league respect the old order? The answer came through the Lima Pact. The settlement regularized Colombian football and set an end date for the rebellion. Foreign players already in Colombia could remain until October 15, 1954, including for matches inside and outside the country. From October 16 and onward, they were to be reinstated to their associations of origin, unless proper arrangements were made. Colombia also lost the ability to sell those players onward without the consent of the original association. In other words, the system closed the breach. El Dorado was brilliant, but unsustainable. Once the stars left, the league lost much of its magic. Crowds declined, revenues declined. Clubs that had spent heavily now faced the cost of having built spectacle faster than structure. The local player base and youth development had not kept pace with the imported glamour. That doesn't mean El Dorado failed. It burned too hot to last, but it changed the room. It showed players that borders could be crossed. It showed clubs that money could move talent faster than tradition. And it showed FIFA that the international transfer system needed enforcement. And it gave Colombia a football age so glamorous that even later, darker Colombian football stories, including the drug money era of the 1980s, should not be confused with it, but can still be understood against the same broad warning. When money floods football faster than governance can absorb it, the game changes at terrifying speed. Before we go, 3 things to take away from May 3rd, 1949. First, El Dorado was born from convergence. Colombia's political crisis, the rise of Dimayor, the split from Adefútbol, and player strikes in Argentina and Uruguay. Second, Adolfo Pedernera was the first decisive crack in the wall. His move to Millonarios made Colombia believable as a destination for elite South American talent, and he helped bring Rossi and Di Stéfano behind him. And third, El Dorado changed football far beyond Colombia. It accelerated the international player market, forced FIFA and South America into the Lima Pact, and helped set Alfredo Di Stéfano on the road to Real Madrid. On this day in 1949, as Uruguay's footballers lifted their strike and Argentina's own settlement was about to follow, Colombia saw the crack in South American football, and through that crack came Pedernera, Di Stéfano, Millonarios, and the golden rebel age of El Dorado. That is all for episode 184 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. Tomorrow, we go to May 4, 1976, and to the closest Queen's Park Rangers ever came to winning the English title, if not for Bob Paisley's Liverpool. See you tomorrow.